Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Kate Eilerton. I'm the director of the Rosa Center for Contemporary Art. And I personally am very, very excited to hear all the different thoughts about what it means to be a collector. I think all of you know that Renee DeRosa, our founder, was one of the most eclectic, crazy, and wonderful collectors that I've ever known, certainly. His passion for supporting local artists, regional artists, and amassing a collection of Northern California art has been so widely recognized and acknowledged. And I thank you, Renee, for giving us a perfect topic to invite all these wonderful people to. Personally, I've known such a variety of types of collectors. There are the investors, there are the eclectic collectors, there are the crazy collectors, there are the art world savvy collectors. I could go on and on and on, but I won't do that. I'm going to let our three amazing, wonderful, and very distinguished and opinionated panel talk about all of this. We have Katie Clark, founder, director of the Catharine Clark Gallery in San Francisco and Box Blur. Clearly one of the coolest galleries I've ever been to. And it happens that one of the artist on the panel, Chester Arnold, is in her gallery, and many of you know Chester's work. He's in the collection here at DeRosa and has had retrospectives all over the country, all over the world. And Megan Segre, who is a collector herself, also an artist. And I'm looking forward to hearing what she has to say about why and how she went about building a collection. So I wanted to begin by asking each one of our panelists to describe themselves, who you are, and what you do, and why you agreed to be on this panel tonight, other than the fact that we asked you to be. A more complete description before they begin, and I'm going to ask Katie to start here, but before they begin, I wanted to let all of you know that a more complete description of their backgrounds, their resumes, can be found in the waiting room on your screen. So I encourage you to look at that because you'll be super impressed. How about you, Katie? You want to start?
Yeah, so I'm Katie, also known as Catharine Clark, and as Kate said, thank you for that nice introduction, Kate. I am the director and founder of the gallery that bears my name. That happened in 1991, so 30 years ago, and of Box Blur, which began 5 years ago in 2016. So we have a couple of anniversaries, important anniversaries that we're celebrating this year. Box Blur functions as a nonprofit entity that's fiscally sponsored by Dance Film SF, and it enables us to bring performance programming to the gallery in response to visual art exhibitions that we have here. And to answer your question about why be on this panel, well, a little background. I met Renee and Veronica DeRosa when I was about 11 or 12. It was the late 1970s. And they would invite ballet dancers every summer up to their home and to a little lake that isn't really visible from the areas where most of the public is allowed to go within the DeRosa museum. And I really credit that experience of seeing things like David Best's work in the landscape with piquing my interest in contemporary art. And of course, like many people in San Francisco, I was raised on the de Young Museum, and my parents were, very engaged with more historic forms of art making. But the experience of going to DeRosa introduced me to, I think, the possibilities for art that I hadn't considered. And Renee was among the first collectors who bought work from me when I opened my own space in 1991. That was such an important thing for me to experience as a young art dealer, but it was also really important for the artist whose work was being acquired. And, you know, I think his maverick sensibility, his commitment to independent thinking really resonated with me and made me take risks that I might not have. And so when you invited me to speak, I thought, well, of course, right? I mean, and so here I am.
Thank you. How about you, Megan?
So I'm Megan, and I've been living in Sonoma for about 21 years now. And one of the first things we discovered was the DeRosa. I mean, it was always something that we brought people to. And I've been active in the art scene since moving here. And I started with local schools. So you'll see a little bit of children's art in the background here. Big supporter of art in the schools, and I helped develop a program with 12 other local artists at the SVMA, the Art Rewards a Student, to help keep art in the schools. And funnily enough, Renee DeRosa on the second show came and wanted to buy a student's piece of art. And that was one of the first introductions I had of Renee. And he was always very good about going to wherever art was shown and could be purchased. And by the way, the student did not sell the piece of art. So I lost that. So yeah, I was from there. I was also on the board and a docent until 2011. And I think that's always been a big part of my experience with art, is introducing art to other people and trying to get them excited about it. So eventually in 2009, I guess, 2009, I went back to school and got my AA in art, and decided that I wanted to be an artist. And in doing that, I went to the DeRosa, and instead of just bringing guests and friends and trying to get a rise out of them because of his wild collection, I started working there and got a more in-depth experience of being surrounded by that kind of art and what art does for your home, for your garden, and for your life. And so I introduced, again, teachers to bringing kids into the DeRosa and trying to get kids involved in developing an opinion about what they like and don't like at an early age, developing those critical thinking skills. And from there, I went on to get my master's at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Art. And I currently have a studio practice that involves a social practice and a studio practice. And my practice, I hope, brings light to complex issues surrounding those who are unhoused. So social issues are really important to me. And so I told you a little bit about probably why I agreed to be on this panel, but I think the most important thing is to share how we all collect. It's a very personal thing. It's something that's really exciting to hear about from different vantage points, and to encourage people, inspire people to develop their own sensibility around art. Paul and I, my husband and I, have collected for 31 years. And I was telling Chester earlier, I don't think we see each other as collectors, but we see each other as art appreciators that want to support artists, living artists, artists that create works that may not always be an easy sell, but especially now as re-entry into the new normal, as we're opening up, that we turn towards art as opposed to away from it to support it. So that's why I'm here tonight.
Thank you. Chester.
Okay, well, my career involvement in art goes back in the Bay Area, at least. Well, even before that, 50 years. I've been painting. This is the 50th year, and in fact, I had my first review in the Independent Journal when I was 19 in 1971. So this is kind of like, is that 50 years? It is. Yeah, it's 50 years. But it even predates that because growing up in Europe, my father was in the working as a spy in the spy service in Germany after the war. And we lived there for 10 years. And during that 10 years, I was exposed to an extraordinary array of art, both in classrooms and school, and in the museums that were freely available to us. And I was the only of my siblings that showed any interest in really following up on that. And I fortunately learned to speak German so that I could traverse the city myself. And in thinking about this panel, it's forced me to think about the origins of why I do what I do, but why I collect what I collect, which has a lot to do with what gives me pleasure, what I'm able to gather of life from what is made by other people, perspectives that are created by people who, well, and I guess like myself, who spend countless hours focused on a particular aspect of their living experience in the art that they make, regardless of whether it's narrative or abstract or conceptual. An artist is putting all of this time into focused on this, pursuing this thread, which oftentimes starts very early in their lives, and it becomes well, I hate to say it, but it is kind of a collectible thing. If you go back to 1971, I look back at everything I've done. Well, I have a world's largest collection of Chester Arnold's work, of course, going all the way back to that. But I'm really glad that I do, because as an artist, I can refer back and art has a remarkable way of anchoring time, a particular time, and not only that, and in that time, anchoring feelings and thoughts in such a unique way. I think Robert Bechtel said once, and I think it was in a textbook that I used in my drawing classes when I was teaching, that drawing itself is a way of possessing experience in a unique way. And I think as a practice, that's true, but it's also true in the receiving end of anyone looking at what was made, because as the consensus that we share as human beings and the experiences that we share are reflected with just a little effort. And I think it doesn't take much effort on our parts to enter the worlds of someone else. And when we do that, our universe is expanded, the world becomes a better place. And whether that happens on a modest level in open studios where artists are being paid a few bucks and can afford to buy their supplies, which is what I did for years and years, or whether they're selling stuff in Manhattan galleries or places for millions of dollars, the same is really true. The support that is given the artist through someone else caring enough about them to participate in their experience creates this world of expansive thinking, which Megan referred to that. But why I was asked to, why I agreed to be on the panel was basically I'm a person who can't say no. I really can't say no. It's one of my afflictions. It's a problem. And so I try to stay away from invitations whenever possible. But when they do come from people who I care about, like you, I'll always say yes, because I do have lots of opinions. And I should say I also taught for 30 years and I'm now retired from teaching. And I went in my teaching career from somebody who was quite shy and who could not stand. I was one of those people who, I think the Chronicle ran an article that said 95% of people would rather die than speak publicly. And then the other 5% are dying to speak publicly. Well, I went from the 95% to the 5%. And since I stopped teaching, I think there's kind of a well of need to talk very much. And I've found this in other artists. I had a lunch with Maria Porges, and she was the same way. She was apologetic. She said, "I'm so sorry. I couldn't stop talking. I've been bottled up for so long. I couldn't stop." I said, "Come on. This was a wonderful experience." So anyway, my teaching allowed me also to connect people in the art world in different ways, to both aim them toward careers of becoming artists and also aim them towards careers of just appreciating art so deeply that when you do that, I think you can then become a collector of anything you can afford that you care about. It makes a difference in your life. So I don't know if that's...
Next slide, and Chester, stay with me for a minute here. Can you put this slide up, Hugo? This is a painting that Chester did called Collection, believe it or not. And Chester, can you tell us why you made this painting and what you were thinking about while you were making it?
I've been doing paintings periodically of piles of things, accumulations of things since the mid 90s. And it seems as though there are images that collect in my own mind of things that I care about. It's almost like a Fibber McGee's closet, in which you have a certain amount of feelings about a certain amount of things, and periodically they have to be exercised by making a painting of them. And in the case of my studio, oftentimes is filled with paintings, and my own deep love of the history of painting and the techniques and materials of art make it such that almost any day of the year I could sit down and make a painting which is a love letter to the history of painting. And in this case, I was feeling, I guess, particularly ambitious because it's a big canvas. It's 7 by 8 feet. And when I built this, I decided to try to include as many of my own paintings in the pile. And if you'd have to be a real, I guess you'd have to be a real student of my work to find them and name them. But there are also pieces by friends of mine. And there's a Philip Guston drawing of an eyeball, etc. But it is a way of celebrating all those aspects of art making, as well as creating an object that the reason that I paint is because there aren't words enough to describe what it is I'm feeling about these things. And as strange as it seems, and I think Rene de Rosa was somebody who knew this very well, artists oftentimes have very strange attractions to things, and thank God they do, because they are that expanding force in the universe of thinking. And in this case, the composition, the formal structure of the composition that moves in all directions and creates this kind of electrical field of movement for the eye, in and out, dark and light, was something that really appealed to me as well, apart from what it describes, just the feeling of the structures themselves. But it also, I think many of the objects appear, I think at the bottom of this painting, which I can't see, but I remember toward the bottom, there's a hammer, there's my shop vac, I sign my name with C-clamp and calipers. These are things that are around me and I'm touching every single day of my life, more or less. And as a confession or as a celebration of objecthood, or das Ding an sich, this is where, okay, we won't get into this, the thing itself, but my dream is to somehow make a comprehensive view of the objects of this world as seen by my own particular set of cells, for every other set of cells it wants to compare theirs to. And in doing so, you get a much bigger picture, much more realistic human picture of the world than you would by just looking at a photograph or just looking at the world by itself. So see what I mean about bottled up energy? And I think that painting does that. The painting does, and I think I wrote something in the top about, I don't know if you have a record of that, I can't read it, but I oftentimes write things on the front or back of paintings when the image isn't enough either, and it had something to do with extolling the virtues of actually delineating an image that is composed of many things. That's a collection of experience, and it's that collection of experience, I think, that is, I keep coming back to it whenever I think about this issue. It's the collecting of experience and how precious that is, and that when combined with the craftsmanship that we have, and I think this was another thing that I became extremely aware of European museums, the extraordinary history of craftsmanship and beauty in everything from a blown glass vessel to a suit of armor to paintings and sculptures to cathedrals. I mean, I almost get a little dizzy just thinking about it. And this is one of the things that makes me, that drives me to want to paint and celebrate that. So it's a celebration painting. Let's just call it that.
Celebrating collecting.
Celebrating the collecting experience.
Yeah.
Thanks by the way, thanks for being interested enough to put it up, because it takes up a lot of space in my studio. In fact, my studio looks very much like that now, except things are a little bit more orderly.
Well, I'm going to ask Katie now. Katie, you've been in the art world for years. The arts ecosystem is complex and can be intimidating for many of us. What, where, and how to buy art is a question that we're all asking. Can you give advice to people interested in starting and building a collection?
I will try. So I think interestingly, it's easier than ever to learn about art in general and about collecting in particular. Especially since the pandemic, most institutions, whether galleries, nonprofits, or museums, have committed themselves to education through online programming of all sorts, like the talk this evening, and other types of Zoom conversations. And these are often recorded and therefore are an ongoing resource. And there are curator and gallery director walkthroughs of exhibitions that are posted on people's websites. There are artist talks, there are free online catalogs of exhibits. Technology now enables us to do 3D documentation of exhibitions, and you're seeing a lot of that online. So there's other sorts of technology that's heightened opportunities to visit exhibits from the comfort of your bedroom. And these are really dynamic ways of seeing exhibitions remotely. It doesn't replace the in-person experience, but it does provide education. And even for myself, right, it allows me to see things that are going on in other parts of the world. So even in real life, when it's not a pandemic, these tools allow us to educate our eyes and our mind about what artists are thinking about and what other people who are looking at art, who are experts, can teach us about their experience of seeing. So I would certainly, you say, what should you do? I would certainly encourage people to do that, especially in this moment when the technology for that is better and better, and it's museums and galleries are opening up again, but it's, you know, they're often at still limited capacity. So until you're able to get out and see things in person, definitely take advantage of what's available online. I was telling my fellow speakers today about a panel that I chaired this morning on the state of the world post-pandemic, and the consensus is that in spite of the tragic loss of lives and jobs from COVID, that free online programming is here to stay and will become an additional tool in our quiver for sharing all aspects of the arts and other fields with wider audiences. So this idea of access is important, and hopefully, while imparting knowledge, also instills confidence in potential collectors and viewers to pivot once the pandemic allows people to feel safer and return to seeing art in person. There's truly no substitute, as I said, for communing with an object in person, even while I, of course, applaud these online efforts. So good places to look at art and to be able to envision it in your home are sites like Artsy. I'm sure probably some of you have heard of that site. They also have reviews in addition to showing you how you can actually place an object you're interested in within a room, so you have a sense of and feel for its scale. And there are many other sites like this. First Dibs is another example. Of course, visiting museums and noting what you like, what you dislike, what you feel sort of meh about is really important. There's so many resources at our fingertips now that allow us to look up more about the artists whose work you're seeing, and to understand what the common denominators are in the work that either excites you or that makes you think or even repulses you. Do you feel you can learn something from it now and next week and in 10 years? Is it, or a similar work, available for sale? Is it in your price range? Can you see it in person or in a local gallery? Then when enough of these questions are answered affirmatively, you have to buy it. Because if you don't buy work, you don't get to be a collector. That is just a really simple thing. And I have taught many classes and given many lectures over the years on collecting. And it's, you know, it sounds really silly, but that is the most important thing. Once you find something you fall in love with and you can afford it, buy it. And in so doing, to get back to that question about ecosystem, you are supporting so many different people in that process. Of course, the artists and their work, but also all the community of people that surround that artist, you know, whether it's a gallerist or the people the gallerist employs, or, you know, even other people in your community who will then have the opportunity to see that work. Say you open your work, your collection to the public, or you ultimately gift that work to a public collection. The ecosystem benefits from your act. So you may also find later that something you purchased earlier on holds a different, or say less significant role in your collection. But the original purchase is a really important example to you of what you valued and how your education shaped your taste and desires as a collector. Chester knows the collectors, Larry and Melissa Kurtz, well, and I think maybe some of you probably do too. Interestingly, they have held on to the works that they purchased very early in their collecting history, even though some of those works might have been considered mistakes. For them, these acquisitions were their education, and they value them even now. They have these works hanging in their basement as a reminder of what they learned and how their collection developed. I recall Larry telling me that many contemporary galleries in San Francisco felt intimidating to him and to Melissa, his wife. So they acquired works more comfortably from galleries on the wharf or in more touristed part of the city initially. Some of these purchases they lost a taste for as they came to see them as more commercially driven and less interesting, say, when they themselves learned more about art. But it was this experience of getting comfortable with visiting galleries, even ones that are not necessarily selling serious art, that ultimately led them to the art scene that was more deeply engaged with ideas and critical dialogue. And from there to artists like Chester and galleries like my own. So I think the takeaway is that art is really accessibly available to all of us in ways that it never have been before in some respects. And there's truly something for everyone. There's work available at really every price point. In this gallery, we sell works for $100 and we sell works for $100,000 and everything in between. And I think that's true of many, many spaces. So don't be scared, show up, be open, learn something, and buy something.
Support your artists, support your past.
Can I add something to that? Because I've had this unusual experience because I have lived long enough and I have had sold work long enough that I used to support my whole project of painting by having annual studio sales, sometimes twice a year if I ran out of paint. And during those years, I sold work for 25 bucks, 50 bucks for painting. I mean, whatever I could get. And as a result, there are literally hundreds of works out there. And now what's starting to happen is they're starting to appear on an auction. And occasionally an auction house will contact me and ask me, is this a real Chester Arnold? And I say, well, I think so, unless somebody copied it. But these works then that were 25 bucks at a sale are selling for like $3,000, which of course the artist doesn't get any part of at this point, but that is a kind of a wonderful, and these were usually estate sales. So it wasn't the person that bought the work that was selling it. It was their people that inherited it, didn't have the same relationship to it, which is another aspect of art sales and collection, which is an interesting one too. It's been an interesting aspect of seeing that happen for me at this particular moment.
And Chester, by the way, you are supposed to legally get 5% of those of that resale.
Yeah, I've heard that's true, but in fact, I only once received a check for part of that artist art for the tax art for the artist, and it was by voluntarily from, I think one of our collectors actually decided to do that because he sold a work of mine to a friend of his and for a profit, and he sent me a check for I think $100, which it brought tears to my eyes actually, the thought that he would do that. I mean, that's a great thing to do.
I had an interesting thing happen a couple of weeks ago. I was showing someone the exhibition here that's going to open April 17th. And yay. And this person is friends with Lynn Hirschman Leeson, and one of her photographs was up on the wall, and she went back and told Lynn that she saw her work in the exhibition at De Rosa, and she turned around, Lynn Hirschman Leeson turned around and said, "That bastard, he bought that for $25.
Renee.
Well, the story about, can I tell the story about the painting that he has of mine?
Sure.
That I originally had made for San Francisco Art Fair in 1999. And I was sure that because it felt like the most important work I'd ever made, I thought for sure it was going to find a home immediately, but it didn't. And Susan Cummins at the time, who represented me, said, called Renee and said, look, you know, you've been talking about getting a Chester Arnold for years. This is the Chester Arnold you have to get. And she actually told him she would give up her percentage of the sale if he would buy it. So that was her generosity in doing that. It was the only thing that would shoehorn him into doing it. But I'm so glad he did, because I was kind of one of the younger artists in the group Al Farrow was an old friend of mine. David Best was an old friend of mine. And they were always talking about these great parties, but I was too young. And I was a neophyte. I wasn't really ready for that. So I got in really late into that picture, but I'm so glad I did, because I think Katie and Renee and I were on a panel somewhere together once, and I got to be a little bit part of that. And he always used to see, I just see him at the Sonoma Market, and he would always refer to me as the professor, which I wasn't sure how to take that, but
It's
he was always
call
very.
me mom, so professor sounds a little better.
Okay, I'm going to move along to Megan here, our collector in the group, and ask you to talk a little bit about your collection and what factors you consider when thinking about purchasing a piece for your collection. And have you ever regretted purchasing something?
So I think we're all collectors. I know that for a fact. And yeah, I think how I mentioned earlier is, it didn't start with the intent to collect. It started with the intent to create a Sonoma home. And prior to this, I had lived in Europe and then in the East Coast. But something that my husband and I could agree on that created an environment for raising a family. And so with that in mind, as I started thinking about this talk and what I wanted to say, I really thought back to my parents and how was I influenced by them? Well, my mom had a lot of craft and folk art. She also collected thimbles. So that was a big thing, something to give my mom from around the world. Paul's parents were avid collectors and collectors of 3D art. Beautiful pieces of sculpture, not just 2D, no offense, Chester, but that 3D, that combination, and you see it in the background here, is where for me, it really starts to activate. And so they were very active in the art scene, purchased a lot of art, and then became Achenbach print group participants, went to studios, which was really important for them, got to meet artists and learn in depth about printmaking and art and collecting, And so my father-in-law kind of brought us along a little bit as well. And so when I started thinking about them, the power of meeting artists and learning about the process was key in how we started collecting. And I guess you could say we have two collections. We have lived in Sonoma for 21 years, but Paul was eventually transferred to Daly City, so we got a place in this city, and that opened up new walls and new floor space. And so we really have two collections that we continue to add to. The Sonoma collection is more of a spa approach, which kind of sounds funny to buy an art, but we decided Paul's father had a lot of some disturbing art and art that we didn't resonate with. And we said, if we have this in the home, we want something that created a peaceful, calm environment. And the factors were, for us, we both had to like the piece. So that was a given. We weren't buying art that we didn't both like. We wanted to live with it and add serenity, humor, and beauty within our environment. So humor was also important. It would have to grow with us. And that's where I'll talk a little bit about regrets later, but pieces that we're passionate about have always grown with us. And we've never felt that we've made wrong decisions in that. And affordability has always been an issue because, you have a budget, and sometimes it's places where you want to go to that cost a little bit more and others a little bit less. And I'll talk a little bit about sources because I think Renee was the man of all sources. He never passed up an opportunity to visit anything. And I mentioned the SBMA children's art, and I am not kidding. He was there trying to negotiate for a piece, and I have a giggle about that. So all the while we spent a lot of time looking at local collections. The Hess collection has also been a big influence for us because it's a personal collection, because it shows you how widespread your taste in art or your experiences can encompass, much like what you were talking about, Chester, anchoring your collection and, feelings, time, and I would say place. When Paul and I travel, we often come back with art because that's the memories that we're bringing back with us. So in our current collection in Sonoma, we have pieces that are of cardboard made out of dictionaries, videos, 1800 Titian skull pieces that are inherited, that were torn, and we had to have, in Holland, we had this farmer family renovate it and stitch it back and the whole bit. So we have traditional, we have contemporary, and I think Renee would have loved that piece that we have here in Sonoma. In San Francisco, and I want to bring Katie into this. So when I was a student, I had to investigate, when I was back in Philadelphia, galleries in San Francisco. So I found Katie by trying to understand my taste through a gallerist collection. And so I started investigating, and Katie's collection really resonated with me. I'd seen past shows that she had online. And so when I came back, Paul and I went to check out the gallery. And we remember when, Katie, you were by the museum.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. And Chester, you had stuff there.
Ministry, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, ministry. And so when we went to find her, she was in a different location. Great space. If you haven't been there, get there. And we decided, okay, what are we going to do? And one of the first pieces we collected there was Chester's, because we went back to, Paul has always wanted one of Chester's. We call it the ball, right? And I'm trying to, I don't have I do have a picture. If I can share screen. And I'm going to apologize in advance for my photos, because these are just home photos. Let's see where it is. Here it is. But so you can get an idea. Oops, did I not do this right?
That piece is the Siamese twin of the piece at the DeRosa.
Yes, it is. So Kate,
Yeah.
we don't have it up, and I can't seem to find it now. Oh, here it is. Okay, so let me try and do this again. Anyways, it's a Siamese twin. And how many of those do you have, Chester?
Well, I did, there was one work that preceded that called Art World, which was a ball, which was seen as kind of a planet of all of the work in the world that I could remember. That was a specific assignment that I'd given myself. And I think that's in the Kurtz collection. And it has on the periphery the names of all the artists that I could remember written around the edges. And a lot of my friends were really worried that I was going conceptual. I mean, I've always been conceptual, but that piece has an interesting history, which I'll tell very quickly. That I was having a show, which Katie helped organize, Accumulation and Dispersal, at the Katzen Center in Washington, D.C. And that piece, the DeRosa piece, had been identified early on as a piece they wanted to put into the show. But it turns out that the director at the Katzen had bad blood with the DeRosa, so the DeRosa wouldn't loan it. So I talked to her, the director at the Katzen, and the show was 2 months away. I said, I'll tell you what, I have accumulated another ball of stuff in my mind. If you pay for the wet shipping of a wet painting, I will make a painting of the same size as best I can in the next 2 months. And I worked day and night. And in fact, I have, I don't know if I sent you, Megan, the process shots of that, but it ended up being a similar composition, but a lot of the objects are different and the atmosphere is different. And it made me realize how much reward there was in series works by artists. An artist that does more than one version of something, gets into a mind frame and expands on something that really makes it worth doing. And everyone ends up having a favorite, of whatever series one makes, if not the artist. So anyway, that's why I call it the Siamese twin. It was forced. It was a pressured situation, but I think it made a really good piece in the process.
And we love it. And everyone who comes in, it's a conversation piece. And that's something that I want to say about, art as well. So in San Francisco, we had an opportunity to reevaluate how we collect, and we did. And how we changed that was we no longer had to agree on the art that we collected. And our collection changed enormously. I really was developing taste, you know, I'm an art student at this point, an artist, and I want to express myself through the art that I collect. And oh, terrific.
Can you see it? Oh, I found it for you and I was trying
Thank
to
you.
share it.
Much better. Thanks.
Mhm.
And so anyway, that changed ultimately what kind of a collection we ended up with. And so our factors for collecting this new collection, I guess, or was being the same, passionate about the piece and the issue it may touch on, because in our San Francisco home, unlike Sonoma, we wanted to be provocative. We decided we wanted to be edgy. We wanted to create the world that we live in a city environment and not maybe a wine country environment, and really put up front and center our values. And so does it align with our values? Does it push us out of the comfort zone? Is it humorous, edgy, sometimes political, but certainly provocative? And does it support artists whose work needs to be out there? And by that, I mean, a lot of the work that we have, and I'm going to go back to, I think, sharing screen. I'm going to show you, okay, can I do that, Katie?
Yeah, I just unshared what I was sharing.
I'm going to show you William Wiley that we have on our wall. And I'm not quite sure, can you see that?
What you need to do, Megan, is double click on that image so that it opens.
I thought I did that, but let me go back.
I can't see it.
Okay. Now, can you see it?
No.
No?
No.
Okay.
No.
Well, we tried this earlier.
Megan,
Yeah.
if you could just unshare your screen and then share again, and this time select the image that's been selected.
Okay, let me try it again.
Try that.
Is that better?
Double click on the image, the Wiley image. There.
Okay, no luck? Okay.
No.
Well, this is a piece that was actually at the Sonoma Valley Museum of Art. That was an exhibition that had, it was Wiley. And we walked in, it was during the war. There it is.
There it is.
Oh, it showed up, okay. And it's a very, emotional piece for us. It's about the war. Chester, you had done that Faces exhibition at the SVMA. Do you remember that? I think it was after that. And it's unusually somber, I think, for Wiley. And it's a large piece, and it's about our treatment of prisoners of war. And so I just wanted to, I'm going to stop sharing that at this point. It obviously, we can continue that, I guess. Whoops, sorry. I'm a little bit of a novice here, obviously. Stop share. I'm going to come back. There we go. Sorry. So anyway, it has taken a different tone. There's social issues, there's political issues. And we started thinking about our collection, and it turns out, Chester, we have you, we have William Wiley, we have Sandow Burke from Katie, all of the, not Wiley, but your collection, Chester, and Sandow Burke's collection that we've done that's very provocative is through Katie, and then we have the Amerigian behind me. But most importantly, I think the goal for this collection and how we conceived of the pieces that we want to surround ourselves by was to start a conversation. A lot of these issues are really difficult issues. Some of our pieces have, social issues, racial issues, age issues, political issues, gender issues. And so when we welcome someone into our home, it's rare not to have a conversation about the art. And it's a good way to get to know your friends and family and to continue those conversations. So I think for us, not many areas give you that sense of freedom that you can create. It's your choices. No one has to like your art. Doesn't bother us. I mean, in fact, if they don't, it's even better because they come in and they have strong opinions about it. Don't be afraid, like Katie said, as far as trying to factors to collect and support artists. But as far as regretting buying pieces, you know, I don't think there are many pieces that Paul and I have ever regretted. We will say that there are artists that we continue to follow who haven't grown in the ways that we would have anticipated. And so they maybe haven't been as risky or gone out and tried different mediums. And so it's not as appealing to us, I would say. But I have to share this one last story, and that's my in-laws who essentially would always tell us about the one regret about not collecting. And they had an opportunity to buy this fabulous Ruth Azawa sculpture. And they argued about it, and one wanted, one didn't, whatever else. And they didn't buy it. And we regret them not buying that piece of art because she's one of my favorite artists. So anyway, we can talk about sources another time, but I think there's so many different ways to collect art. And we've done it all. Like Renee, we've been to MFA thesis exhibitions where you can purchase, open studios, because we want to know these artists. We want to have the experience of hearing about their art. Fort Mason Art Market, we've been there, regional, international places. Tracking down artists you like. If you see them someplace, track them down. The internet's a perfect way of doing that now. Reach out to them. Artists are great about wanting to talk about their work. And I guess the last thing is you can buy pieces at auctions, but remember that artists donate and those pieces go to a cause, which is great. But if you want to support a specific artist, get in contact with the gallery, get in contact with the artist, whatever it is that allows you to reach out.
Yeah. Thank you, Megan.
Could I throw in a comment? Because in thinking again about collecting, both myself as a collector and I think for collectors too, that encountering a work that affects you in a certain way, in some ways at best it affects you almost like falling in love. It happens to you and you don't know exactly why, and after you spend some time with it, you begin to realize what it is in that thing that you really needed, if you've made a good choice. I'm thinking this with respect to Frances, because she was working for a gallery. She came to the door of my studio, and it was a kind of an immediate, and I realized over the years that was a person that really filled out all the gaps in my personality personally, and became a kind of a lifelong mentor and partner in the process. And just as a good marriage with a person, works of art can end up becoming mind expanding and enriching in so many ways as they go down the road. But that first flush is oftentimes what makes me want to collect something. And only later do I realize, well, I really needed that. Like I had some Otto Dix prints and nobody else liked them, but I realized that there was something in those prints that I needed, that personally to process and I've oftentimes referred to my own encounter with the history of art as the metabolizing of art history. You look at something, you fall in love with it, you stare at it endlessly, all of a sudden you find your hand moving in a mysterious direction that echoes what you've been thinking and seeing about that work. And that's just how the tapestry and the warp and weft of the history of art is made, I think, especially in the modern era where you have so many influences intersecting with one another. Anyway, sorry.
I couldn't agree more with the falling in love metaphor.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful one. It's sort of like, and over time you also get to understand that work of art more. hopefully grow with it, right?
Yes.
People say it's not that they don't regret the pieces they bought, they regret the ones that they didn't buy, to
That's
your
right.
point, Megan.
Yeah.
But also, since you brought up a couple of artists, Sandow Burke, whose work is also represented in DeRosa's collection, I wanted to let all of you know that there's a panel in which he's speaking tomorrow. If you're interested, I can send information to Kate and she can disperse it, or you can go to, I think, the Minnesota Street Project website. He's speaking at 1 o'clock on an exhibition that is in the atrium area of Minnesota Street Project, about his imaginary monuments. And he'll be speaking with Paul Maloney, who I know Megan and Paul know well, and who's a wonderful, wonderful printmaker. You will learn a lot about what original prints are, and it's a great way, because prints are often more accessibly priced, a wonderful way to really understand what original printmaking is about. I'm not talking about photo reproductions or posters. I'm talking about working on a press with a master printer to develop an idea that is original to that medium. And I will also be on that panel. It's at 1 o'clock. And I know my director, Anton Stubner, bless him, has prepared a really wonderful PowerPoint of images, which include the American Procession, Megan, among other amazing works. So for those of you who are interested in learning more from the artist's mouth, Sandow's a great one to listen to tomorrow.
Great artist as well. We're running a little out of time. We were hoping to have a half an hour for questions and answers from the people on the Zoom here. So I'm going to skip ahead to some of the other more practical questions about collecting. Art fairs seem to be a place where many collectors buy art, or at least they used to. Why do you think this is true? And do you think they will continue to be successful given what we've learned this year, online, etc.? Do you recommend them or dislike them?
So do you want me to start with answering this, Kate?
Yep.
So art fairs, they are wonderful and dreadful all at once. They're like a supermarket or a department store of art exhibitions, though they've often become confused with biennials. So for the collector, they offer a one-stop shopping opportunity to view and acquire work from around the globe, and for viewers to learn what tastemakers believe is the most important work being made at that moment. They are also painfully expensive for the exhibitors. That means art dealers, and are often fraught for artists, since the presentation of work can feel haphazard or uncurated, let's call it. Like many things, art fairs have a positive role to play in some respects, and in others have become a detriment to the brick and mortar model. Obviously, if people are going only to art fairs, they're not coming into galleries. And I think that's a mistake. Art fairs level the playing field for galleries, sort of, and create barriers to an even more elitist, if geographically neutral, space for art consumption. To get into an art fair, it's an adjudicated process, and there are pluses and minuses to that. From my research, it is predicted that only the Frieze and Basel fairs, two huge art fair conglomerates, will have the financial wherewithal to weather this pandemic. We will see. I know the first application that we've been invited to apply for, that is saying that it will be in real life, not online, is Basel in Miami in December. So yes, hopefully by then, I guess, art fairs will return. And of course, the art world is nothing if not resilient. Artists teach us that, I think, every day. So my guess is art fairs will reemerge. I have to say that personally, and during this period, I've really enjoyed a break from the fairs, though I do miss my international colleagues and traveling to other parts of the world. I found that I filled the space of being on the road and with building coalitions with various nonprofit partners to launch some really exciting programming this fall that I never would have had the concentrated time that I needed had I been on the road as much as I used to be. And just in case you're wondering, this fall, we're producing a work that will reveal itself on the San Francisco Bay. It's a series of video portraits presented on an LED screen that's 20 feet wide. And that screen is on top of a barge, which is floating on the San Francisco Bay. The project is by Shimon Addy and is called Night Watch. And we're collaborating with the Immersive Arts Alliance to present this really powerful work, which is about refugees, most of whom are from the LGBTQI community and who sought asylum from 12 different other countries. And they sought asylum in the United States. So stay tuned, it's coming to you this fall. It'll be free and visible from many different points around the San Francisco and East Bay.
Thank you. Chester, Megan, you want to say anything about art fairs? You don't have to.
I don't have much. I mean, I used to really, as an observer, I used to enjoy tremendously the Fort Mason art fairs when they happened, simply because it was a way for San Francisco, which is, has always been accused over the decades of being so provincial. It was a way of seeing what was happening all around the world, different galleries across the country. And I really enjoyed doing that, and I was a big fan of that. And I was sorry when those things stopped. I have never been to one of the higher end marketplaces, and although I'd love to, I mean, I don't have time to do that. I have paintings to make. but I did enjoy I think it's a wonderful showcase for artists and students too. I mean, it may be one of the unsung virtues of them is that when artists and potential artists see them, it has a way of really feeding the art world in a way that I think is really important. So I'm for them if they come back.
I think one thing that you can say too about them, especially given like from the perspective of a gallery in San Francisco, we're pretty isolated out here. So even a gallery like mine, where let's say most of the curators from museums in this region visit my shows with some regularity, which is wonderful, and I'm grateful for that. However, you know, it's not often that curators, say from the MoMA or from the Met or from the Chicago Art Institute or LACMA come into the space, because people just aren't in San Francisco in that way or that often. So when we do, you know, a fair in Miami or a fair in Amsterdam or a fair in New York, we definitely meet curators. And for me, I mean, meeting collectors is wonderful, although weirdly, I find myself selling to the same people that I sell to in San Francisco, just in other parts of the world, which I'm not ungrateful for, but it's also just odd to sell. Like, I think we sold a Nina Cacciadorian last time we did a fair in Paris to someone who lives here in San Francisco, who then gave it to SF MoMA. And it was just so funny for me to consider taking this piece from this city to another city only to bring it back to this city. Anyway, but the curators we have met around the world have, you know, really helped the gallery and the artists, more importantly, to have careers that have been seen by wider audiences. And for example, we brought Stephanie Siuko's work to Paris. It was there that it was seen by Lucy Gallen, who's a curator at MoMA, who then curated it into a very important photo exhibition that happens every other year, which has then, I think, in many ways launched her career on a much more, well, certainly a national, if not international level. And, you know, that Chester's right. You can't, it's pretty difficult sitting, you know, in your space in San Francisco or in your studio in Sonoma to reach these wider audiences if you are at home. And, you know, to Chester's point, I think you were in the New York Times, Chester, when we showed your work in Seattle. So yeah, it's important to get out of the gallery. I think the thing that's difficult is that fairs can cost upwards of $50,000 for a long weekend. And the risk to galleries is huge. And there's been a lot of writing about this. I can send some articles to Kate if she wants to distribute them to you, but you know, it can put a gallery out of business in 1 week. And that risk, I think, is not truly understood by the public or even sometimes by the artists. So, you know, one of the reasons why the fair doesn't happen at Fort Mason anymore is that lots of people came and no one bought anything. And so galleries, there was attrition. And, you know, it's a shame because I think it did offer San Francisco an opportunity to be seen by a wider audience. Anyway, those are a little more expanded thoughts on fairs and their complicated place in the world of the arts.
Yeah. And from my perspective, it's kind of a mixed feeling because it can be very, you know, fun. It can be a lot of fun to go and just be part of the scene, not intimidating. There are enough people, you can go in and out of booths. You don't have access to artists at that point in time. You're talking to someone who's manning the booth, not always someone that I think maybe as approachable as if you're going into a gallery or certainly an artist studio. But it allows you to kind of have a bird's eye view of what's happening in art, in a local scene, in an international scene or whatever. I don't tend to, or Paul and I don't tend to buy art at that place because it's much of a different experience for us. We have, because we fell in love with a piece or two. But it is nice to get exposure if you just want to go and start looking and thinking about art and what you like and developing an opinion of your taste.
I think it's also important for collectors, and maybe Megan, you can speak to this too, because I know you guys enjoy travel and have lived other parts of the world, you know, to get the perspective of other collectors from other regions. And I know I'm always interested to see, you know, if I'm in Brussels, say, how does what I'm exhibiting resonate with that audience that's different from Houston, that's different from Amsterdam? Yes. And, you know, it's different regions have have a different response to the work that you show. And I know I've learned a lot about just the lens through which people see work differently, depending on where they're from. And, you know, you can't make total generalizations, but there are really interesting responses that sometimes are often surprising to me, I'll say. So I know I've talked to a lot of collectors who say one of the reasons they love, you know, showing up at fairs around the world is that they meet other collectors with different points of view. And, you know, I think it's particularly attractive thing to do if it's in a wonderful city like Amsterdam or, you know, Paris, because in addition to participating in the fair, often the city will kind of show up in a certain way for that fair. And what I mean by that is that the museums might have special exhibitions, or they may invite collectors who come from other parts of the world into the collection on off hours. Private collectors will invite people into their homes. And so that can be a really amazing, like, international community experience. And if you've never done it, I would certainly encourage you to do so.
I'm going to ask one more question before we move to questions from the audience. And we're going to skip talking about the Vogels and their collecting, but I do, Hugo, would you mind putting up that slide about Herbert and Dorothy Vogel? I'm just going to talk about them for a second, give you guys a breathing minute. This is a couple who, both of them worked in the post office, in a local post office in Manhattan. They took the subway to work every day. They collected over 4,700 works, which is now owned by and shown at the National Gallery in DC. They would only buy works that they could take on the subway. They visited artist studios a lot, and there's a wonderful movie about them. And I want to encourage anybody that's interested in collecting to watch the movie and see. Everybody's been talking about falling in love with the practice of collecting. Watch these two. They're very humble and, you know, quiet, and yet they collected this huge, amazing collection with very famous artists on a shoestring budget. So you don't have to be a millionaire to collect. I know Katie said that early. So watch this movie if you can. And my last question is about studio visits. I'd love to hear from all three of you. Do you enjoy them? Do you encourage them? Do you hate them? What are your thoughts on visiting an artist studio?
I'll start.
Okay, go for it.
In general, if they're just with a couple of people, I like it because like I think Megan and Paul came recently last year, and to have just a couple of people to relate to, you can have a conversation. This is the problem that artists have, I think, at openings. There are too many people to have meaningful conversations with.
Yes.
And when a tour comes, I had the Museum of Modern Art ask me to do a studio visit. And I said, oh, sure, this is an opportunity for me to get visible there. And so this pink bus pulls up in front of my house and 50 people get out. And if you've ever been to my studio, you know, the joke that it was so tight that you couldn't clap like this, they had to clap like this. Because in fact, not only was it impossible to have a conversation, but nobody could really see anything. So that was kind of an absurd end of the spectrum. But I would say that there's nothing quite as wonderful. And I think we experienced this at Katie's Gallery with her curbside show, because we had this opening that was timed and just a couple of people would come in at a time. And it was very much like a really high quality studio visit, because they could ask you questions, you could focus right with them and have an intimate conversation, which I think it's really important for, at least for me, to have that conversation if it's possible. And so I would say qualified, yes, I do appreciate studio visits.
Good to hear.
And I would say, Katie, if you don't mind, I'll jump in now. You know, I think it's one of the most exciting things to experience. And if you ever have an opportunity to be invited into an artist studio, do it. It's just a way to enter into an artist's view of the world around him, her, they, and to have that dialogue, to have that opportunity, like Chester is saying, if you can have some quality time. There have been times that we visited artist studio that initially we weren't so thrilled about the work, and having an opportunity to better understand where it's all coming from. Often pieces would fit into what we were collecting, what we wanted. And it was just taking that time to look at it through their eyes and having them understand how we're seeing it, and seeing and having that exchange that I talk about over a piece of art that's really magical. And there's no one closer to the art than the artist to talk about it. And I did want to mention, as far as, you know, buying and things, we also have some of Chester's studies, right, Chester? So Chester does these little studies, and it's a way of entering into sometimes that tier that's very welcoming for purchasing art that you otherwise wouldn't be able to afford on a massive piece. And so you have those opportunities. Yeah, exactly. That's great.
Page of studies from
Exactly. And they're intimate, they're beautiful, they engage you, and you know, that love that you're talking about, it resonates. And then you think about, gosh, you know, is there a bigger piece, or is there something different, or whatever? And we've kind of become addicted to Chester's work in that respect. So I think giving yourself the time, being open to that conversation, and whether it's through a museum that you have an opportunity to visit an artist place, it is not the same experience, like Chester said, if you have 15 people with you. But galleries, Katie's opened us up to a lot of various artists, and it has been eye-opening. It's really been wonderful. So love them.
And I don't have much to add other than, you know, one of the reasons I personally love going to studios is it feels like you're getting access directly to the artist's brain and the way that they think. I am often as interested in what's around the art as the art itself. It's sort of a lot, like if you're in Chester's studio, you're gonna see those boots, you're gonna see, you know, that palette, you're gonna see that vacuum cleaner. And it just kind of, it's like looking at the sketchbook. It's a more intimate and way to get to know an artist's practice, and more about the way that they think and what informs their process and their ideas. So yes, I echo everything that both of them said. I also will say that, yeah, these big groups that come in, it's hard, right? I think, I applaud institutions for trying to do that, trying to introduce their audiences to a studio experience. But it is difficult, and I now try to protect my artists from that a little bit, because it really detracts, I think, from their opportunity to get their work done in the studio. It can be a little bit of a dog and pony show without much connection to the art at all. So there's a lot to be said for going to a studio visit, and if you go, try not to comment on things like how much rent do you pay? Or, like, those are nice flowers on your desk or whatever.
Or the worst, how long did it take you to do that? That's the worst.
Yeah,
That's
the only answer to that is a lifetime.
Yes,
exactly
right.
the right amount of time.
Or can you get
Well,
a
it's-
deal on this?
could I say this? There's another aspect of that, and that is the artist, instead of having a studio visit, and I've done this at the DeRosa, where I was asked to come and talk about my painting to a group. That's a very different thing, because it's nice to visit the work yourself if you haven't seen it in a long time. And then if there are 15 or so people there to talk to, it ends up opening a dialogue that can continue and expand as well in that location, without the problems that might exist in a 400 or 500 square foot studio.
Right. And by the way, we have some of Chester's work up in a little maritime exhibition we have in our back room. I don't even know if you know that, Chester, but people are welcome to come see it. They look fabulous.
Yeah.
So there's a good question from Cynthia DeVos, I hope I'm saying that right, about auction sales. Do you use them? How do you connect? Talk about that.
So, a lot of the artists I work with are now at a point in their careers where, as Chester mentioned, things come up on the secondary market, which is another way of saying auction. It also means galleries that resell works that have already been sold once before, or at least once before. And, auctions are really, they're super complicated for gallerists and for artists. Chester presented it in a pretty fabulous light. You buy something for $25 and it goes for $3,000, but there's plenty of, you bought something for $3,000 and it goes for $3. So,
I've had that happen too, by the way. I didn't want to feature that in the conversation.
I only bring this up because I think also, as Chester pointed out earlier, artists don't really benefit from auctions. It's rare for works to hold their value at auction, especially unless they're really established artists. And so if you do own work that you've purchased from a gallery and you've inherited it or passed it on to your children, say, and they decide they don't want it, but for whatever reasons you are no longer want to live with it, you're downsizing, I would always encourage you to return to the gallery where you purchased it originally, for all kinds of reasons, including, it's really, we have this incredible custodial responsibility to the art we sell. When Chester has a retrospective at some point at MoMA, for example, they're going to come to us and ask where all the work lives. And guess what? You don't get that information when it sells through an auction. I know where every single piece is that I have sold of Chester's work for the 20 years I've worked with him, or nearly 20. So, that's a resource that galleries provide that is not provided by auction houses. And anyway, there are things that you can say that are positive about auction houses, and I'm certainly happy to get into that if you want to. Sometimes you can get a Chester Arnold for perhaps less than you can find it in the gallery. But I also think then you don't get the opportunity to support Chester, support a gallery, and frankly, to get to know Chester and to get to know the community of people that surround a gallery. And so I think that's it. It's something, but it's not the same thing.
Agreed.
Yes.
So now if you have questions, you have to unmute yourself to ask your question. And
Or you can put it in the chat, I guess, too, right?
Chat too, right? Mm-hmm. Do you see any in the chat there, Andrea?
I don't.
Oh, you're not shy. Come on, people.
They're that part of the 95% of people who would rather die than speak publicly. That's even on Zoom.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
If something sells on the secondary market through a gallery, like if it comes back through you, Catherine,
Yeah.
does the artist then get a slice of that resale? Is that, I mean, because I know in Europe, this is a big thing and it's really well monitored for artists getting income from resales of their work, but you mentioned it, I was just curious.
Yeah, so the way the California law is written, and it's only in the state of California, so the other 49 states do not have this rule, is that if you resell an artist's work for more than what it was paid for it, then the artist is entitled to 5% of the sale. And so we honor that when it happens. We don't do a lot of resale, quite frankly. And I mean, we try, but here's one of the issues. When collectors bring works to a gallery to resell, the percentage that the gallery makes is really small, and the artist is still alive. And if I sell, your piece that you're reselling, that artist gets very, very little money, that 5%. The gallery gets very little money. And if I sell Chester's work that Chester brought to the gallery, that artist does much better. So obviously I'm not going to keep an image from somebody who enjoyed something that was, here that was for resale, but it's just a lot. We're not incentivized, let's say, whether that's has its effect consciously or unconsciously, to resale. Now, I am really blessed because all my artists are alive and I don't work with any estates. And I imagine that things shift once that changes. And I hope it never does, because I love all my artists and I want them all to thrive forever. But it is also something I'm, beginning to talk about with the artists, because, some people are aging. So I guess all of us are aging. Some are just further along than others. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. And I would say for the oldest artist that we work with, his name is Masami Taraoka, because he really came of age in the 60s in Los Angeles. A lot of the people who bought the work at that time are now quite elderly, or not even alive. And so we see a lot of works come to us on resale. And because he no longer works in the way that he worked in that period of time, those works are much easier for us to sell on the secondary market, and so we do a fairly robust resale of Masami Taraoka's work. For most of the other artists, sometimes we try, but it's quite difficult at this point.
Well, I have another question, and it's a perfect question to the final slide in this presentation. Rene de Rosa exercised maximum intellectual and aesthetic freedom outside the New York and Los Angeles art scenes. He loved the fact that his collection received a curatorial frown, and that he built an incorrect museum. That's a plug for our show. What influence, and he was known for collecting divinely regional, superbly parochial artists. What influence did the local art scene have on his collecting, and is this typical?
So I want to hear from other people, but I also feel like I have a lot to say about this. So if you don't mind, I'm going to start, and I'll try to go quickly. I wrote some things down, which is, there was a time when every emerging artist in San Francisco, whether they were in a graduate studio or an undergraduate studio, basically awaited with bated breath a visit from Rene. And he was a collector that would launch their careers when no other collectors in San Francisco cared about them. And so young gallerists at the time, and artists alike, we all felt similarly. And the imprimatur of de Rosa meant you were making smart decisions in your practice as an artist or as a gallerist. So while the local artist may have shaped Rene's collection, he also shaped our idea of what it meant to be a Northern California artist or gallerist. it's his maverick sensibility and general moxie, I think, that also made for great stories. And he seemed a character grown from the stuff of what it meant to be living and working in the arts in this really once funky and renegade region. And I miss him for that. And sometimes I miss the version of San Francisco that he seemed to embody, which frankly doesn't exist anymore. So that said, the art world has changed a huge amount since Renee began collecting, and there's a much wider scope to the kinds of practices that are embraced by institutions and galleries. It's far more difficult to do something radical as a collector or as an artist at this point in time. We live, thankfully, in a far more decentralized and diverse time when more ways of working are celebrated than ever before. When Renee started, the art world was all about New York and minimalism. San Francisco elite purchased their art from New York, even when those very same artists were showing in their hometown. The art world is no longer so monolithic, thankfully, and the eclecticism that is reflected in Renee's collection is a precursor to what happened across the world in terms of stylistic breadth and unconventional approaches. You might call Renee a trailblazer, I'd say. I think he really anticipated without knowing it that no one would care anymore whether something was regional or international.
Yeah, right on. The 6 vignettes in the Incorrect Museum exhibition, Sweet Land of Funk, Pot Palace, Dude Ranch Dada, Nut Art, Worlds in Collision, Museum of Conceptual Art, they're all telling the story of Northern California art because that's what he collected superbly.
And
Yeah.
I think that both from a regional and a national, it's been an absolute treasure and an inspiration. And for me, that unconventionality was that permission to go from our, somewhere brewing, our calm spa type environment, to that edgy that we always knew it was in us, but it wasn't quite, we weren't quite ready, or we didn't have that feeling of freedom. And every time we would visit there and revisit, it just reinforced how powerful it is to be unshackled. And this is what art does at any level, at all levels, to become a collector of what you fall in love with, to borrow from Chester. And so I have to say, locally, the passion that he collected with, and as I mentioned, he never shied away from any opportunity to buy art at whether it's the Arts Guild or the exhibitions or whatever. That window into Northern California art has been powerful for me. But there was also that charm too of him being in the galleries, just hanging out in the galleries, and you'd be coming in and you could strike up a conversation. And I think wine might have had a little bit to do with his collecting. But I'm very thankful that we were here at a time that we could actually experience him as well as his collection. And yeah, I think that's kind of what this area has allowed people to do, to be themselves, to do it. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun, very inspirational.
Any thoughts there, Chester?
Oh, I was just recalling the fact that Renee came to a Sonoma State College student exhibit when I was teaching there. And this was before he had purchased my painting. And he bought a piece by one of my students. I thought, what the fuck, Renee? Come on. But in fact,
yes,
it was one of the most haunting pieces I've ever seen. This girl was a child of a wig making family, and she had a wig in a fish tank, and it was kind of floating around in there. It was better than anything Jeff Koons ever made, I think. And I don't know if it's still in the collection somewhere, but I got over my own ego when I saw the piece, actually. So it's good. No, I think I used to talk about his collection and Bay Area art in general, and Northern California art in general, as being kind of the weed garden of the art world. Unlike the hothouse plants that grow in New York, the West Coast doesn't really need much water to keep going. It doesn't have the billions of dollars pouring into it, and yet artists still persist in making really serious and dimensional things in all media. So I'm really proud to be a part of the whole West Coast scene, and especially to be in the DeRosa collection.
That's a wonderful moment to end this conversation. I want to thank the three of you for being so smart and cool and opening up your own histories to share with us. It was just wonderful. And thank all of you on the Zoom link here that joined us. And I hope to see you April 17th in the galleries. COVID protocols in place, wear your masks, but we're opening back up and we're really excited. And
That's the best
new
news.
De Souvero sculpture that
Wow.
not new, it's moved from the back of the property to the front of the property. So when you drive by DeRosa now, you will just drop your jaw because it's so cool to see. And people now will know that it's an art center and not another winery. So come by. Hope to see you soon. Thanks.
Thank you, Kate. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
the invitation.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Have fun, Chester.
Thank you.
Yeah. Enjoy.